My sister called me selfish in front of 30 guests at my son's 7th birthday party, simply because I cut the first slice of cake for Asher before every single cousin had arrived. And the exact words she used, selfish, just like your mom, landed with a weight that had nothing to do with cake and everything to do with a wound our family had never actually let heal. My name is Bellamy Hartwell, 34 years old, living in Denver, Colorado, and I want to explain something before this story goes any further, because I think it matters enormously to understanding why that single sentence hit me the way it did. Our mother, Constance Hartwell, died when I was 26, and for as long as I could remember, my older sister Renata had quietly, persistently painted her as cold, controlling, and selfish, a narrative I'd absorbed without ever fully questioning it, since Renata was 7 years older and had simply always been the family's authority on who our mother really was. I stood there at Asher's party, holding a cake knife, watching 30 faces turn toward me, and I did something I want to be honest about. I didn't defend myself. I quietly finished serving the cake, thanked everyone for coming, and waited until the party ended to ask Renata, privately, exactly what she'd meant. "You always do this," Renata said, arms crossed in my kitchen once the last guests had left. "You make everything about your kid, your timeline, your convenience." Mom was exactly the same way. Do you know how many of my birthdays she cut short because something with you needed her attention first? I didn't have a clear memory to counter that claim, since I'd been considerably younger during most of Renata's childhood. But something about the specific bitterness in her voice, the particular precision of a grievance she'd clearly been carrying far longer than one birthday party could explain, made me start asking questions I'd never thought to ask before. I called my Aunt Josephina, our mother's younger sister, the following week and mentioned Renata's comment almost in passing, expecting reassurance rather than the careful, hesitant silence that followed. "Bellamy," Josephina finally said, "I think it's time you actually understood what your mother was dealing with during those years, because I don't think Renata's version of events is telling you the whole story." What Josephina told me over the following hour reshaped 30 years of family history I'd never once questioned. Our father, it turned out, had struggled with a serious gambling addiction throughout Renata's childhood, one our mother had spent years quietly managing, intercepting mail before creditors' letters reached the rest of the family, controlling household finances with an iron precision that Renata, as a child, had experienced as cold and restrictive without ever understanding the debt collectors and repossession threats our mother was actually protecting all of us from. "Your mother wasn't selfish," Josephina said. "She was drowning, trying to hold a household together while your father gambled away nearly everything twice, and she never told either of you children the full truth because she didn't want you carrying that burden. Renata experienced the restriction. She never saw the reason behind it." I sat with this information for several days, feeling a complicated grief for a mother I now understood considerably more fully than I had during her actual lifetime, and a growing concern about exactly why Renata, now a successful marketing director with 3 children of her own, still carried a narrative about our mother's selfishness sharp enough to weaponize against me over a birthday cake. I found part of my answer 4 weeks later, going through old family financial paperwork while helping settle a minor dispute about our mother's remaining estate. Still held partially in a joint family trust, our grandfather had established decades earlier to fund educational expenses and milestone celebrations for all the grandchildren, myself, Renata, and our cousins included. The trust's annual statements, which I hadn't closely reviewed in years, showed a pattern of withdrawals over the past 4 years that didn't match any educational or celebration expense I could identify. Withdrawals authorized under Renata's signature as the trust's current administrator, a role she'd taken over from our mother's estate attorney following a family vote I'd barely paid attention to at the time. I brought the statements to a forensic accountant named Priscilla Ondo, a distant cousin's recommendation, and someone with no personal connection to our family, who confirmed within 2 weeks what I had begun to suspect with a growing, uncomfortable dread. Renata had been withdrawing funds from the trust well beyond any legitimate educational or celebration purpose, using the money instead to cover a series of personal debts related to a failed side business venture she'd never disclosed to the rest of the family, totaling just over $81,000 over 4 years. "This isn't a gray area," Priscilla told me. "These withdrawals don't correspond to any of the trust's stated purposes. If this were formally investigated, your sister would have significant difficulty explaining these transactions as anything other than misappropriation of trust funds." I want to be honest about how devastating this discovery felt, layered on top of everything I just learned about our mother. Renata had spent years quietly building a narrative that our mother was selfish and controlling with money, while simultaneously, secretly, doing something considerably more dishonest with money that belonged to our entire extended family, including cousins' children who would eventually need those educational funds themselves. I didn't confront Renata immediately. I understood, having just watched her weaponize a single sentence at a birthday party with such practiced precision, that I needed to approach this carefully, with documentation rather than raw emotion, if I wanted the full truth to actually surface rather than be reframed, once again, into a story about my own selfishness. I requested a formal family meeting with our cousins who remained trust beneficiaries, along with our grandfather's original estate attorney, now in his 70s but still practicing, to review the trust's administration. Renata's composure, so effortlessly deployed at my son's birthday party, didn't survive contact with $81,000 of unexplained withdrawals laid out chronologically in front of 6 family members and a licensed attorney. "I was going to pay it back," she said, her voice tight, the first genuine crack I'd seen in her composure in years. "The business was supposed to succeed. I made a mistake, but I never meant to actually take anything permanently. You've had 4 years to disclose this and pay it back voluntarily," our cousin Marisol said quietly. "Instead, we found out, because Bellamy happened to review statements you were counting on nobody looking at closely." The family attorney, reviewing the trust's original governing documents, confirmed that Renata's actions constituted a clear breach of her fiduciary duty as administrator, sufficient grounds for immediate removal from that role, and a formal repayment plan, structured to restore the full $81,000 to the trust over the following 3 years, with her share of future distributions withheld until the debt was fully satisfied. I want to tell you about the conversation Renata and I had 2 weeks after that family meeting, because I think it matters more than the financial resolution itself. She showed up at my house unannounced, and for the first time in years, I watched my sister cry without any performance in it at all. "I think I've spent so long being angry at Mom for making me feel like everything was my fault as a kid," she said, "that I never let myself actually understand what she was protecting us from. And somewhere along the way, I think I started believing that if I was struggling financially and hiding it, that made me exactly like her too, except I never gave myself the same excuse I refused to give her. I didn't forgive her instantly, and I want to be honest that our relationship, 2 years later, is still something we're rebuilding slowly and carefully rather than something fully healed. But I did tell her about the conversation with Aunt Josephina, about our father's gambling, about the mother we'd both misunderstood for entirely different, equally painful reasons. Renata has fully repaid the trust now, 18 months ahead of the original 3-year schedule, taking on additional freelance work specifically to accelerate the repayment, once she understood exactly how much damage her narrative and her withdrawals had caused, not just financially, but to a mother's memory neither of us had ever fully understood while she was alive to defend herself. I still cut the cake for Asher's birthdays exactly when it makes sense for our own family's schedule, without waiting for every cousin to arrive, because I've finally, fully let go of a narrative that was never actually about cake, or selfishness, or convenience at all. It was about a mother who protected her children so completely that neither of us ever understood, until years after she was gone, exactly how much she'd quietly carried so we wouldn't have to.